Thanks everyone for joining. This is the first afternoon session for the Db2 stream. This is session 2BB, and I'm pleased to introduce Anthony Chiabattoni, I should say, and he is from IBM Labs at Silicon Valley. He's a member of the Db2 zOS development SWAT team, and he's got 27 years of Db2 experience. And today he's going to go into some SWAT team tales, updated especially for 2021. And yeah, Murphy's Law, what can go wrong will go wrong. That's the story of today, because just about everything that I've been using today, including printers, laptops, and the internet, have all broken today in one way or another. So I'm hoping that that won't mean this session a break. So if you've got a question, pop it in the chat, and Anthony will stop and answer the question as we go along. So I think that's how we're doing it through here. If need be, I can unmute your phone so you can explain your question. Please do support the two charities we've got at GSC this year, which is RNLI and Guide Dogs for the Blind. We're building up quite a nice little pool of money for them. So it'd be really good if we can hit our targets by the end of this week, by tomorrow, in fact. So please do contribute. Please provide feedback at the end of the session. Should be a link in the agenda. Just follow it through and put in all the scores, which I'm sure will be 9 or 10 for Anthony. But anyway, pushing it along. I think that's it really. Shout if you've got any problems in the chat also. And Anthony, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Colin. And you can hear me okay? I'm hoping.
Yeah, absolutely clear.
Good. Well, first and foremost, guys, everybody on the line here, thank you for coming to the session. As Colin mentioned, I'm Anthony Chiabattoni, and he pronounced my name better than my boss and my friend for many years, John Campbell. After 27 years, he still mispronounces it. And I work for the John SWAT team, reporting up through the Silicon Valley lab. But luckily, in South Florida, it's 9 a.m. and not 6 a.m. So good morning from me, and good afternoon to everybody on the line. This session here that I started this on the fly a couple of years ago in Malta or Rotterdam, an ad hoc session. And this is basically various different things that we've experienced on the SWAT team when we do studies or we have customer engagements or social circle discussions. So what I'm trying to do over the last 2 years is add to this and add some meaningful value to it. So I hope if you have any questions, please interrupt, put it in the chat room, and Colin will interrupt here and let me know. So I think that Colin talked about the charity raffle. If you win the money on the raffle, you're entitled to send 10% over to South Florida and support my 9-year-old twins and go to school. No, I'm just teasing. I wish you the best of luck. Do the raffle and charity for the good of the order. So here's our agenda today. I'm going to start off with Db2 preventative maintenance, and then go into a series of topics about recovery, assets, integrity checking, local recovery, and a hot new topic, continuous data protection, i.e. Cyber Vault. And then a couple items that we'll go through is hyper dispatching has been very prevalent here in the last 12 or 18 months, at least in the States. System application performance monitoring. I'll touch base on Huffman compression in function level 504 versus function level 509. And if there is time, I'll beat the proverbial dead horse with universal table spaces at the very end of this. Is there something in the chat already? Okay.
So that's just me, Anthony. Yeah. I don't know whether you can make your display bigger, but on my screen, it's in the middle. So there's plenty of space all around it. That's fine, but if anybody's got a really big screen, it might be a bit too small, that's all.
Yeah, you just actually got it's right in the middle of mine. I don't know if I can make it bigger, Colin.
Okay. I think it's okay, but I'm just wondering if anybody's got a big screen or too far away, they might be a bit small, but no, it's okay, press on.
Okay. So the introduction to maintenance, people ask me, I was a customer for many years. Db2 maintenance is one of these pieces of tasks that depends where you're at on this. It could be you look at it kind of boring. I look at PTFs, it's not important. But then if you're responsible for it, you become very passionate. So when we go through a discussion, not only do we normally have a passionate discussion with the customer, talk about their maintenance cycle, but our team, myself, John, Paul, me, all you heard talk yesterday, our newest member of the team, Bob Tilks, we get very passionate and we spend quite a bit of time because it's one of the most important pieces of what we do in DB2. Applying or not applying could result in DB2 crash, data corruption, in core out. You've looked through, if you've done maintenance, you've looked through all the error descriptions and APAR descriptions of what can or cannot happen. And folks along the way vaguely would have either a very defined process for maintenance, or a loose process, but there's always a process to put in maintenance on a routine basis, but not when there's an exception, i.e. a critical PE or hyper, while you're going through a maintenance cycle and in between maintenance cycles. So applied maintenance is one thing, but dealing with exceptions is different. The next bullet item is the frequency and the process of applying maintenance. And this probably goes across all DBMSs or infrastructure, is not communicated properly to management. A lot of times management, oh, you're putting DB2 maintenance on, I really don't care until it's a problem. And if they don't understand what the process is and the methodology, the rules behind it, then we're wrong. If you put a PTF on too soon, it causes a crash, it's your fault. If you haven't put one on, a PTF on, it's been 6 months old, and that problem hits, it's your problem. So a lot of times management, they don't know, and it's easy for them then to blame the person applying maintenance if that process is not defined and signed off on. So on the next slide here, common problems. Customers are too far behind on preventative maintenance. And that could be for various different reasons, change windows, resources. Some people I don't want to put a change on the system. I'm not going to apply DB2 maintenance for a year or two. And we have customers that we've done studies on the last 24 months and said, you know what, I'm 2 years behind on maintenance and I'm not going to apply unless there's a problem. So there's no hypers or P fixes applied within that gap. High profile production incidences could have been avoided if that hyper PE fix was applied. And Campbell always mentions the story that if you're 18 months or 2 years behind on maintenance, it's similar to jumping off a skyscraper. You jump off the skyscraper, the air is good, and Colin or myself will ask you halfway through, hey Colin, how's the weather out there? How's it going? Everything's good, and all of a sudden flat, the problem hits. Change windows, change slots are somewhat of a challenge as we go forward. So folks, because of single points of failure, affinities and whatnot, they don't take advantage of data sharing to move the maintenance in outside of a true outage window. Fix on failure. Now, if you're behind on maintenance or and you need to have a fix applied, then the pre-rec chain, especially in version 12 with the continuous delivery model and putting correction fixes on top of new functionality, that pre-rec chain could be very, very long. And we had an example of a customer that had a very simple problem in version 12. They're behind on maintenance. It was a simple APAR that our client success team identified. one. Simple, right? Well, the pre-rec chain was 51 deep, and they had to rush those 51 plus one into production. And believe it or not, one of those other 51 caused a secondary outage because of getting them in and not being able to properly test because of the pre-rec chains. Also, a common problem is if you're not applying maintenance, it's hard to exploit new functions when you're not, especially in version 12, when it's everything in the maintenance stream. And again, delayed maintenance puts you more risk for outages and problems. And then we talked about on the previously static, routine, SMP environment and structure. For the most part, that if you have that process in place, it's not a bad process, but you have to be able to have some flexibility. And what I mean by flexibility is the fact that if you're going into, if I use version next that we're coming out announcing coming out next year, at the end of version 12, your maintenance cycle can be maybe not as aggressive, but when you go into V next and you're an early adopter, you're going to want to be more aggressive. So your process as your SMP environment needs to be flexible with different over time, and the time of the release and what you're want to exploit. And this is a truth in this picture here. Applied maintenance can and will avoid outages. It's just inevitable, whether it hits you or not today. It does, and it's up to 20% of the multi-system outages that we've studied could have been avoided by not even an aggressive maintenance cycle, but a correct maintenance cycle that fits in with your environment. And you've always heard us talk on the right-hand side that if a PE is going to come out, we're going to notice that PE in the first 3 months. And then after the first 3 months, then it becomes old bugs, not new bugs. But again, for these scenarios to be true, we do need to have people back maintenance, and we do need to have people to be bleeding edge. So, it's interesting because we were doing a study here recently where customers applying maintenance 12 times a year, every month, leading edge. They're aggressive, but it works for them. But we need people like that so that we can uncover these problems. And again, there's that Bell's curve where you want to be. It depends on where you're at, your appetite. You could be on the left-hand side or the right-hand side, but there's that normal sweet spot there in the middle. So, what are our recommendations in this environment, in this arena? So you need to be proactive, have a process, whether you're aggressive or maybe if you are applying maintenance a couple of times a year, understanding your environment and a change management process to add PTS, but not add too much risk. So what we'd like to recommend in the perfect world, if you wake up in a beach here in the South Florida next to me in Miami with your favorite drink and the water and the sun being nice, we would like to see customers perform maintenance 4 times a year. And 4 times a year would be 2 major and 2 minor. Major is being the latest quarterly RSU +1, plus hypers and PEs, and then follow that up with in between the 2 majors, a small minor release with just hypers and PEs. And what that does is, number one, you get the hypers and PEs, but then as you're bringing that RSU level forward also, then you also get the pre-rec chains and keep that somewhat current also. If you're early adopters or of a new release, a new function, you may want to be more aggressive. If you're at the end of a cycle and not being exploiting many things, you may be able to afford being less aggressive. But 4 is the target. If you get a couple, at least 2 in a year, that's a good thing. And this last bullet item is very important that we have very passionate discussions with. Reviewing the whole data on a weekly basis if you're receiving on a frequent basis, or looking at the IBM ASAP reporting that we send out. You want to be able to look at the whole data that's out there. And this is when we'll talk about it in a couple of slides, when you're doing a maintenance package, as well as when things are in production. Because if we come out with a hyper or mark something PE in between your cycles, you want to know about it and not ignore it. So if you know about it, you could look at it and say, does this affect me? Put it in the spreadsheet, PTF 123. It doesn't impact me. Maybe it's REST services and I'm not using it, forget about it. Or this problem does affect me. There's an operational bypass that I could take. Implement the operational bypass to reduce the risk, and then go forward and put the fix on through the next maintenance cycle. Or the scenarios where there's a red alert, a very high priority hyper, or something that you may specifically run into yourself. You know it's going to hit. You may want to expedite it and have a flexible, expedited process of moving PTF up into production on a quick basis. But you want to know about it and document what's out there. Some other common problems are with PEs, and I'll go with the PEs during a maintenance cycle. So if you're perform maintenance on a frequent basis, a lot of times customers will be chasing a bone, a dog with a bone, I'll say. And a dog with a bone is chasing a return code 0. So if you're building a package, you see a PE or PE block, PTF in error that's blocking a bunch of maintenance. A lot of times, not always, customers will back that, exclude that APAR and move forward. But with that, they will not, they'll back off some other maintenance that may be more important. So reviewing it, looking at it, and then move forward a little bit here. Taking a look at that, you may want to take action. So with that, if it's something that you can live with, you may want to come back. If it's just a couple PTFs, come back with another maintenance cycle. You may want to ask IBM for an APAR fix. You may want to delay your maintenance. It all depends on evaluating your process and taking a look at that and deciding if I keep this off, it's only a couple PTFs versus I put it on, I keep it off and there's some high priority ones that I'm missing. And don't hesitate. If you don't have an advocate, if you don't have someone like myself or John or Mihal or Paul Horn in your social circle, open a case up and ask how important is this PE fix? Because sometimes it's a very niche scenario. And so then, Colin, I see your message here. You review hypers on a weekly basis. And are you making a point here that some of our APAR descriptions are not what they should be?
Yeah, so we've certainly had plenty of discussions with John about this, and it's almost a recurring theme. We meet once a month with IBM, and he's asked us a number of times to provide evidence of where there's not sufficient information. So we tend to pass those up to John and Karen and our advocates at the UK. But I still find, even after maybe 2 years of trying to get more information out there, we still see like that they'll pop in and there'll be like 2 lines of text saying it breaks and you get this error. Well, that's no good to anybody apart from internals. It really needs to be more explanatory, or at least some idea of what the information is. I can understand there's a legal aspect and therefore you don't want to overstep it, but it's almost like there's no point providing the information if you're just going to say it breaks and you get an error code X.
Yeah, so Colin, I can tell you, so for the sake of the good, I'm with John. I agree with what you're saying, 302%. Even being on the lab side of it, sometimes I have to go fishing on that. I could tell you that myself, John and team, you've heard John and Karen as your advocates, we are constantly striving to get better here, and we need to get better. So you want to be, if you can look at the APAR and it makes a lot of sense to you, and you can make a decision on your own, that's a lot better than reaching out to John, Karen, or a case. So I agreed 100%. And I could tell you that, at least from my role in the SWAT team over the last 4 years and knowing more and more developers, I continue to push that agenda also. And please, everybody on the line, if you see these things, bring them to the attention, open a case, bring it to the attention of your advocate, because we do want to get better. So that's the end of the maintenance cycle. I'm going to move into 4 different areas on recovery. So if there's any questions on the maintenance, go ahead and post them in the chat window. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the recovery scenario. So recovery, I'll start with recovery assets. So when I talk recovery assets, I'm talking Db2 active logs, archive logs, and image copies. And the common problems around these assets is commonly we see customers wrapping the active log data sets too frequently. Now, our rule of thumb that we try to shoot for is approximately 6 hours. And 6 hours of running through your, cycling through your active log configuration gives you the ability, if there's a problem, you can react, get notified on it, investigate, and fix the problem. We have customers, believe it or not, we 2 customers in the last 18 months that they were cycling through their active, they're large customers, cycling through their active log configuration in 1 minute's time. 1 minute. So that doesn't give you any room for error. If everything's fine and our software is great, great. But if there's a problem, you're basically almost guaranteeing an outage. And one customer said, "Oh, Anthony and John, we don't need to worry about that. That, you know, our BTS that we have is fantastic." And 1 month after the study, the BTS had a problem, a delay. They're going through the logs in a couple minutes, and it caused a production outage. Another problem there, we talk about going to BTS. BTS could be a good thing and it could be a bad thing, but a BTS to the operating system is a tape drive. So writing the BTS, you have all the characteristics of the tape drive. Global and metro mirror configuration. We've seen now in the last couple of years, people cycling through their active and archive logs and not getting their archive logs over to the, not the metro mirror site, but the global mirror target site quick enough. So for a period of time, their active logs may go back an hour, and they may have an hour gap for the asynchronous replication of the archive logs with BTS. And you could have a gap in the recovery log at the recovery site for a period of time. Common problems here, image copies, written or moved to tape BTS, and we'll talk about the identity crisis. Log no events, only taking 1 copy, and then using GDGs or non-meaningful names for the image copies and archive log data sets. And another one is, if you are following our best practice of writing these things to DASI, then moving it off to a tape media, just to keep an eye on the archive log pools and your image copy pools, especially when we go into a new release. Version 12 was we had some increases. I'm not sure on version next yet, but just keep an eye on your pools for growth and different changes within Db2. And then the last item on the slide would be to keep the retention period consistent across your archive logs, across your image copies, so you have a full picture of things. So some of the risk on the recovery assets, people say, you know, BTS, so what? But if you write the active log or archive logs or image copies to BTS, especially if you stack the image copies on BTS tape, That is a tape unit to the operating system, and during the recovery event, it serializes the data set on that tape. So if you're multiple recovery jobs looking at an archive log, they're going to serialize. If Colin has a recovery job and I have a recovery job that was stacked, even though we don't think that we're going to have contention, we're going to have contention. Only one of us can have that at the time. So again, the identity crisis. So that's a big one. And then again, the wrapping around of the active logs too frequently could potentially cause Db2 to freeze, install, and cause a problem. And then also cause a problem, as I mentioned on the previous slide, of if you're writing archive logs of VTS as asynchronously written, make sure that there's no gap in your recovery log, just in case Murphy does strike and you have to recover at that specific time. You don't want to have a hole in the log and lose data. And then the archive logs and image copy naming standards. We recommend, instead of using GDGs, put a date time esoteric in there. You'll have it. You can use your SMS routine to clean it up. Instead of the GDGs, it's not accident prone, where the GDGs, you could roll through them pretty quickly. The log no events, this is a big one for us because, so many people, almost everybody does online reorgs. So if you have an online reorg and you have just one single image copy, and God forbid Murphy and his neighbors and his friends and the friends with the pints of beer come knocking on your door, and that one image copy gets deleted, corrupted, or a manual personal issue, delete it. You cannot recover through that log no event without that copy. So it's good to have two copies for being for protection. So our recommendations here on the assets is to keep the active logs for a minimum, the active log configuration, data being in active logs for a minimum of 6 hours and target 24 hours. Now, in version 11, we standardize on a uniform data set size of 4 gig minus 1 byte, and you can have up to 93 pairs. Now, in version 12, we up that limit to 768 gig. Now, don't jump on the bandwagon, so I'm going to supersize these to 768. Find a nice little size around that. We've seen very good success. We're going from the 4 gig minus 1 byte up into 20 or 30 gigabytes, and going out to 70 some active log pairs. And you're going to say, why, Anthony, do you only want to go to 70 some active log pairs when I can have 93? That gives you the ability, if there's any problems, or you have to do some encryption, you have some active logs buffer that you could add logs along the way for whatever problem. So it doesn't shut the door on you. Whether you need it or not, that's beside the point, but it gives you that flexibility. Our recommendation is write both of the active archive logs to DASD. Then straight away, you could take the log copy 2 and move it off to some tape medium right away, and keep log copy 1 on DASD for up to 48 hours for recovery purposes. So log copy 1, ship it away quickly. Keep log copy 1 on our archive on DASD for 48 hours, which would then supplement the 24 hours of the active log pair, the first bullet item. And then this is more of an older process from beginning of version 12. We added more logging, extend the LRSN, and the famous RIDs. So just keep an eye on those DASD pools. Put processes in place to monitor that. And the reason why I like to have a proactive process around that is we had a customer, a very large financial brokerage firm, that would check on this periodically. So they didn't have an exception processing, and they did not have automation in place. And what happened was they checked every 3 months, and there was tremendous amount of additional logging, and they were really at the edge of being able to fit in their archive log pool. And I'm going to stop here real quick. I see a question from Colin again.
Yeah, it's me again. It's just
Yeah.
around log striping. I mean, it's just something we've kind of done it in the past, and kind of moved away from it a bit. But I just wonder whether, if you really want tip-top performance, whether that's a feature that is useful now, or is it really the hardware's just eradicated that feature?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Colin. So I get the question from my colleagues at the field here in the States on this question all the time. In the last couple of 3 years of the hardware, I don't think we've run into anyone that's needed striping for performance to get to where the performance needs to be at a certain level. So for the most part, I'd say the 90-some percentile, no. But if by chance you're faster than everybody else, you could do it, but it's not the norm any longer. So the last thing there is the set zparm timestamp to yes, and that's not only for yourself but for our level too. If we see an archive log that's D12345 A256, and we're chucking through and looking at things, it makes it very difficult. So if you have the date and timestamp, it really does help you. So additional recommendations, I'll cycle through these pretty quickly. Dual image copies for log no events. If there is some sign of data corruption and you have a retention period of X amount of time, that you want to be able to stop these assets from rolling off. Now, by no stretch of the imagination would I ever, or John or anyone in the lab, think that you're going to recover back 30 days ago or even 24 days ago, maybe not even a week ago. But data likes to hide sometimes. Problems seem to hide. So you could have a problem where the corruption happened last 2 weeks ago, and you just identify it today, and we're going to need the archive logs, image copy assets to go back and find the problem. Or you may need your favorite log analysis tool to go find that in data that's hiding behind your point of view. Again, standardize all your recovery assets to a certain retention period. I mean, we like to say 31 days. That may not be feasible, what, 31 or 14, whatever that is. If you go 14 and more aggressive, just if you have any signs of data corruption, you want to have a process in place to stop that rolling off process. And we talked about the reason why you potentially need 14, 21, or 31 days of archive and active logs. Another thing here, I put this in the presentation here, the monitor your BSDS and your max arch. Someone had 10,000, had the max number of 10,000 in their bootstrap, but their archive logs were so quick that they only kept 7 days. Or their archive logs, active logs were so small, they hit the max arch so quickly. They thought they were keeping 31 days, but they're actually only keeping 7 days. So max arch, big enough, 10,000 plus the size to be able to keep the retention period also. And the bullet item here on this slide here, the last one, include a date, time, image copy type. I like that, a full versus incremental, so we can look at that and make a good judgment around that. So if I move from, that's the recovery assets. This is what we're going to need if we need to process through. Now we're going to talk about the wicked neighbor that Ant didn't know what he likes, is data integrity checking. So the check utility is a tremendous tool to diagnose problems and identify scope. So a lot of folks are not taking advantage of this, especially using the flash copy technology. And when there is a sign of data corruption, they don't know the scope of the problem, and it's hard to drive a recovery process without identifying the scope. So some problems here is if this is not proactively done some work and you don't have flash copy set up, then, and you have ZParm check fast replication preferred, and that means if I could get flash copy, great, I will. If not, I won't, and I'll still go on. And so you have a DBA that is not familiar with this process. I see some inconsistent data. I submit the check utility. I don't have flash copy set up. I put the object in read-only status, and all updaters are in a negative 904. So we see the fast replication set to preferred on a lot of occasions on ZParm. So you'll see on the next slide the recommendations around that. Again, if you don't have it set up or you don't know how to use it, know what to look for, you can't tell what the scope of the outage is. And again, if you know the scope of being a couple objects, obviously you're going to fix forward. We had a customer, a large bank in Texas, that thought they only had a little bit of data corruption. And even when Hawken told them, Hawken Roberts said, I think you may want to recover the whole world. They go, no, we only have a couple objects. Well, it turned out a couple objects was just over 50% of their objects, because they had a problem with their DASD vendor HyperSwap technology across the controller. If they knew the scope, they would have probably went with Hawkins' recommendation and took an outage and recovered. What ended up happening is they're chasing that missing data, the corrupted data, for 30 some days, and they ended up losing some financial information. Recommendations straight away as a defensive measure: set fast replication required, and if flash copy is not available, the share level change, it will fail straight away and not put in read-only status. Try to exploit flash copy technology. It doesn't mean that you need to have flash copy set up for one. There is that limitation in some aspects of with the Metro Mirror and Global Mirror. You want to set these off to an isolated, carved out DASD. They're temporary to be able to do these things. And you could set either your SMF routine or your store class to util temp store class or SMF routine. And I'm going to stop with a question here in between here. Paul has a question. For some of our applications, we still perform weekly share level change image copies to virtual tape, and you're taking a system level backups nightly, Paul, daily, it looks like. In this case, we can take a system level backup. I'm not sure if you're referring to backup system, base utility, or recovery expert system level backup. I'm a conservative, defensive person here on being John's disciple. I would, if you take a daily SLB, that'd be a good recovery base. And Paul, thanks for, Paul is user recovery expert, which I used to be the face recovery expert on my Rocket days. The SLBs are good recovery base. I would still take a weekly share level change image copy to check the integrity of the pages and whatnot. And just in case, God forbid, there's a problem, recovery expert does let you create an image copy from an SLB, the technology, but I like the idea of doing a weekly image copy to supplement that SLB. So I hope that helps, Paul.
Sorry, Paul, if you wanted to ask, I can unmute you. Just stick up your hand if you wanted to ask a further question on that, or if that's okay, we'll carry on.
Okay. Db2 log-based recovery of multiple objects. Again, when is it required? There's a whole bunch of different reasons there. Catastrophic DASD subsystem failure, a HyperSwap scenario, a plan B for disaster recovery. Sometimes when you're doing a disaster recovery, there's a scenario where the torn 32K page. inconsistent mirroring, bad application code, operational issues, bugs within our code, believe it or not, our vendor code. And if you run into any of these, John did the wrong thing. He took a picture of John Campbell Road in the UK. You're going down the John Campbell Road of recovery. Excuse me. And that scope could be one application, one object, a series of applications, or God forbid, the whole world. And I love this quote, especially since I live in Hurricane Central here in South Florida. Log-based recovery is very rare, but statistically, it's more frequent than any true DR event. Most folks won't have a DR, but inevitably two or three customers a year will have a recovery, a mass recovery event. And that's the whole reason why John created the SWAT team, to be able to supplement and be there for customers. So anytime you're in a recovery situation, you're in a plan, design, stress test, optimize, repeat. Plan, design, stress test, optimize, repeat. Taking the image copies on a regular basis. I'm going to run my image copies at 6 o'clock every night to be able to recover. Yes, you're protected, you have a recovery base, but that may not be sufficient to meet your recovery time objectives of log applies. If you don't go through this process, at least thinking of it with a pencil, paper exercise at the very minimum, you don't know what could happen, and you don't know how long a recovery scenario could happen. Are my procedures up to date? Is there anything that changed in version 11 to version 12? Do I even have a canned job to recover the cataloging directory? Most customers don't, believe it or not. On my VTS, do I understand? Are we stacked? All these things that come into play. What is it that I don't know that I'll know when I start going through this process? So a lot of times, without this planning or talking, there's no idea of what I need to bring back from an application perspective. Some customers could bring, if they plan out well, I could bring back my online bill payment, and I could bring the history back later. If you don't know those dependencies or dependencies across applications, what do you bring back? And now it's not documented. We've a lot of times gone away from Db2, referential integrity for performance, and now we're heavily dependent on application architect's knowledge and a war room time to go through this. And again, the procedures or the perceived procedures around the backup recovery are compromised by technical configuration. Well, I'm only going to keep 7 days of image copies because I'm going to save DASD, or I'm going to do a VTS and I'm going to stack every one of my image copies on the same volume. Backup and recovery procedures haven't been addressed in years, not taking advantage of new technology or new functionality. And again, we're a lot of times heavily dependent on VTS, which is not a bad problem if you could plan accordingly. And that's an identity crisis, as we mentioned, because it's a tape unit and it can be serialized. And so this is the recovery aspect. As I go I'm speeding up the pace a little bit. I hope that's okay. So Colin, give me a red flag if I'm going too fast. I have 13 minutes and a lot of slides. The logging environment. So you have really two options here. Supersize your active logs to keep as much information as you can, up to 24 to 48 hours on active logs, and then keep your archive logs, log copy one on DASD for a day. Or if you're down closer to, on the right-hand side, closer to the 6-hour time frame, then keep your log copy one on DASD for 24 to 48 hours to speed up recovery process. Or if you go to VTS, they have the ability to bring that data back from tape to DASD to parallelize your recovery. If you're writing active logs, archive logs to DASD, look at the bootstrap for the block size and look at 24,576 instead of 32,767. And I mentioned the process of bringing the archive logs back, whether it's HSM recall or a copy. And from an application recovery perspective, try to proactively, if I paraphrase through here, try to proactively have that list of business critical applications need to come back so you can bring back some of the business. Keep the data, the documentation in place so you can have it proactively. Look at the dependencies, i.e. if you have IMS, if you have Oracle, or if you have upstream or you're replicating another Db2, understand all that information of dependencies so you can recover it correctly. And again, the whole objective here is to have this in place. You're not panicking in that warm room. I've been there with you. It becomes somewhat challenging. So if you have this up front, it's good. We did, when Adrian was on the team, we did a study in Brazil, and one person said, you know, we have a list, we could bring it back. And the DBA came on the interview the second day, goes, no, we had a major outage last year and we had no clue. So you just want to have this list up front and be able to work from it. We talked through about any first sign of data corruption, stop the rolling off process temporarily until we find the problem. And then the last one here, as I mentioned, BTS of multiple times about identity crisis. It's not bad. You just got to build your recovery jobs to utilize this tape stacking in the correct order. So in IBM world, if you look at this, you want to optimize your recovery jobs. I have it tattooed on my left shoulder for about 20 years now. You want to have 51 recovery jobs per DB2 member because of 510 log apply memory, 20 or 30 objects per recovery jobs, and spread across as many members as you can. If you're using BMC or another vendor, they have different technologies, recommend reaching out to them and they'll give you their best practices. So the next topic is very big here. I'm just going to exploit this out so we can talk through it. Is continuous data protection, i.e. cyber vault, these immutable copies, especially with all the ransomware, malware that's going on out there. So there's a technology both DASD vendors and IBM and EMC have in place. I think probably Hitachi does also, where we do thin provisioning copies to an immutable environment. So you could potentially have multiple copies every hour on the hour to be able to go back to. If you have that environment, you can then the copies by definition are immutable. But if you want to copy those off, you need a forensic environment. It's just like a disaster recovery scenario, group restart that you can do it for forensic. The key thing here is that the safeguarded copies are IO crash consistent and not application consistent. So you're going to either need to have group restart or DB2 forward or backward recovery to make it well, or if you're recovering back on a data set level, you have to supplement that with a log only recovery on top of laying that down. If you look through, there's a red book that we just published about, you'll see my name all over it. We're growing this environment. So if you want to use this continuous data protection, safeguarded copy as your recovery base, at this point in time, you do some roll your own as we work the integration, just test it and become super confident. And again, we need to make that consistent either through crash restart or log on the recovery. If you're looking at recovering a whole system forward, you might want to take it, understand that to be able to take that copy at 10 o'clock, and then if you had the archive logs and move it forward, you need to have the RBLP updated, recovery-based log point. That gives the system as a whole a starting point to do a log on the recovery. And today, as we speak in version 12, there's only 2 times that RBLP is updated. If you're doing backup system, or if you're doing a set log suspend, set log resume, which is impactful. So in version next, I don't know whether John and I got this in the base or where it's at. Hawkins going to go out and update the RBLP every 5 seconds. So that will give you the starting point every 5 seconds, and then the ending point would be the syspitter R or syspitter T in a conditional restart record. So in theory, we can make this this process pretty good going forward. If you're doing individual data sets, just be very super confident, test it. We've taken it from a Cyber Vault back to production. It looks very good, but you need to take advantage of, take a look at extents and whatnot, and then supplement that data set copy with a log-only recovery on top of that. And again, today, regardless of the Cyber Vault environment, as we work through integration, image copy is the very important still to take, even if you have that copy. And going back to, I think, this Paul's question, the good thing about an image copy versus an SLV versus this immutable copy, image copy will do an interpage integrity checking along the way too. So you always have that piece of recovery, and you probably always want to recover to an image copy first. But if there is a last resort or scenarios that dictate it, you could use this process to do so. So I'll take a breath there. If anyone posts any questions, I'll go ahead and ask now. And I'm going to move to the system application performance monitoring. So the theme here in this, and we see this over and over again, is data versus information. Data versus information. Most customers, I'm not speaking to each and everyone on the call here, most customers have data, but they haven't turned around it into information. And also funding of proactively evolutional trends, analytic trending is not in place. So we collect the data, but don't do anything to look for trend analysis. We're there only as a reaction if there's a problem. We have data, but no key performance indicators and no baselines. So what is a problem? And I'll often use the case that if someone asks me if the number 13 is a good number or a bad number, it's a good number to me, but you need to put it in a context. Is 10 Git pages per SQL a good number? I don't know what's normal for your environment. So you want key performance indicators and identify what normal is. And again, a lot of granularity of data, customers will DDF, AccuMac rolled up to 10, you lose the granularity, or they take the one-on-one records, your KICS transactions collected at the transaction level, but when they store it in the performance databases, they roll it up and lose the detail behind it. So if you listen to John or myself or the masterclass, here's just some, and Colin has a copy of this that's share with everybody. Here's just a sample set of some key performance indicators, number of transactions, elapsed time per transaction, CPU per transaction, lock contention, buffer updates, and whatnot. I could tell you some stories here, but that across us, but I won't because of time. But here's just a sample set of that. And again, what we're looking here for is you want a graphical interface. Like we're looking on the left-hand side, if KID 225 for storage, if you know that a dump, your max space is 15 gig, usually it's larger now, and you have 30 gig of real storage available for a dump, you're good. If your max space is 15 and you drop down to 0, that's bad. The case on the right-hand side, we had a customer that had a memory leak, and as the thread footprint went from left to right, in the blue line, it went up and the LPAR went down. They didn't notice the problem along the way until it was down to, they had just a very minimal amount of memory on the LPAR. So Bart and I were able to reactively graph this, but if they had this up front, they would have known the problem in the middle of the month, and they could have took an IPO or a bounce as to clear things up and open a case up. And again, here's a scenario where we're able to, from a SWAT team perspective, take a last count 19 contention and map that to unavailable log buffers, which was causing a problem. So looking at the two numbers together in a graph visually, able to put this all together. And if anyone has ever done a 360 study, John and I, we live off of something like this. We have we get your data, we put it in a spreadsheet, and we're looking for the amber conditions. And these are 1 minute increment problems. So if I look at last count 3 in the latching, it's very small, I'm not even look at that for the week. Now, if I look at last count 24, it's above my limit of 10,000. I'm going to go look to see if it happened once, if it happened every day, or multiple times a day. So it's a graphical interface to give you the ability to go fishing or alerting elsewhere. And again, collect the data. The recommendation here is collect the data, put evolutional charts together, and be able to look, trend, and compare the deviations across the baseline, and then also have exception reporting around it. So turn your data into information. And I think for this, I'll go pretty quickly through hyper dispatching. Hyper dispatching is critical in the Z14s and Z15s, and basically it gives the big impact to your environment where you can have spread engines across and give priority appropriately. So really it's Prism and zOS dispatch interfaces to establish affinities and units of work from a logical processor to a physical processor. And so the ultimate goal is to be able to send that data back to the cached instructions and have the priority for your appropriate workload. So when we break this down, if you hear this, there's very simplistic terms here. So as you're taking a CAC, splitting the LPAR up and giving appropriate weights, the physical engines will be defined based on your weights as vertical high. A logical equals a physical, 1-to-1. Vertical medium, where you have 2 logicals to 1 physical, and as vertical lows is the umbrella where these engines can be shifted across LPARs based on need. So vertical highs, that's the best is my own personal engine. Vertical medium, I'm sharing with somebody else, and vertical low. One thing on the vertical low I'll mention here that is very important, that be able to take a vertical low from Colin's LPAR to my LPAR, we have to park it, and I have to unpark it to be able to use it. So the park and unpark takes a couple seconds to do, and WLM interval of recognizing that engine on my LPAR now is 10 seconds. So if you see a 10-second delay, this is what I'm looking for, that vertical mediums that were moved around. The story here I'd like to give is we did a study, the last in-person study that our team did here in the States, and we had a customer that were given 2 zip engines by the IBM local team as a Christmas present. It was in December, January. They had a lot of workload that was being redirected from the zip over to the general processor. So they gave these zips out there to them. And what happened was, before the zips even were added, the weighting had one LPAR only. They had a sandbox, 2 development, and production, and the weighting wasn't assigned appropriately. So when they added these 2 engines, the engines, because of the weights, got shifted more to development in the sandbox. And they're like, oh my God, I got these 2 zips for Christmas. I was supposed to have a nice Christmas present. I'm getting nothing. Well, when we looked at that, Adrian, myself, and John, we looked at it and said, your weights are well off. So we talked to them on Tuesday of the study. On Wednesday night, they did a change control, changed the weights with the same zips, and bingo. They had they had the zips were assigned to the production workload, and the redirect went away. And I'm going to touch on one last topic, and that will give you 5 minutes over. So I apologize, Colin. Huffman compression came out in function level 504. It's a fixed length to another compression routine. I think it's a good thing. Function level 504, it was at the subsystem level, the Z-form level. Turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, which is kind of scary. You could go through all these things, but it needs to be function level 504 and version 12 at the subsystem level. No one in their right mind would, I hope, wouldn't turn on the subsystem level. What we have done now in function level 509 is at the object level. So you could pick your favorite objects and look at it. We have some additional columns, and then you could kind of go forward one by one by one, and where mileage may vary, and do it incrementally. So Huffman compression, please don't use it in 504 at the whole unless you're very confident, because it's on or off. And then 509 is a great time to take advantage of it. And I'm going to stop there. I said that I'm not going to beat the, if I ran out of time. You guys had some good questions. UTS, you just say that it's a good thing, what the direction we're going to go to. And if you have a cookbook between PBRs, partition by range versus partition by growth, and the theme that I want to tell you is, if you made a bad decision along the way, you have a multi-part partition by growth object, you want to get away from it, in version next, we're going to give you the ability to do it online. And with that being said, Colin, I'm going to stop it there, and I'm going to give you guys a scary picture here in a second. Some additional information. As my boss, 1 John Campbell's good, seeing 10 John Campbell scary. Gives me somewhat of a headache with him, but 10 John Campbell knowledge is great. So if you want additional education, go to World Db2, and John has, during the pandemic last year, recorded some good sessions. And Colin, with that, I'm sorry I went 6 minutes over. If I cut into someone's coffee break or beer break, I apologize upfront. Please fill out your surveys as surveys. If you have bad things, don't tell John or don't tell my boss. If you have good things, send him good notes, but most definitely give Colin feedback so that he can make the conference next year even better.
Great, thanks so much, Anthony. I don't know whether there's any more questions. There's nothing else appeared on the chat, as we're just running a bit over. If there is any questions, then shout now or forever hold your peace, wave a hand or something. Okay, don't think there's anything coming through. Thanks so much, Anthony. It's a really good session. I've written a load of notes, as always, on these sort of sessions, and I'm going to check up on quite a few things when I get back online. Okay. It's always valuable.
If you have any questions, there's my email address. You know, if you have any questions that are relevant to the presentation, or we can help you with, let us know.
Great. Okay. Right. Thanks very much. I think that's all the DB2 sessions for today, but we start again bright and early at 9 o'clock tomorrow. So, and of course, tomorrow is the final day at GSE. So please come along if you can. Just a final plug, please do put in the feedback. It's very easy, just follow the link and put in the scores. There's only about 6 questions, I think, so please do that if you can. Right. That's it. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good evening, and there are still sessions on other streams. So, and there's a keynote at 5 around cloud and IBM Z, which sounds interesting. I'll certainly go along to that. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks very much, everyone, and see you again soon. Take care.